Okay, welcome to this afternoon's session of the Connecticut Art Standards webinars. I'm Cindy Parsons, hosting tonight's session. This is the fourth of 6 webinars that have been planned as part of the state standards rollout this spring. These webinars are designed to help arts educators learn more about the new art standards and how to implement them in classrooms. This afternoon, we welcome Matt Worwood, Digital Media and Design Instructor from the University of Connecticut. Matt recently produced a documentary that explored creativity in education and is currently working on a second film called The Class of 2032. Sounds really interesting, actually. Matt will be discussing the role of technology and design thinking and creativity in the classroom. During Matt's presentation, you're encouraged to use the chat box that you'll see in the lower right corner of your screen. Submit questions, which we will respond to after the presentation. The presentation should take about 45 minutes, and we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to answer questions after that. You can find the chat box again in the lower right part of your screen. You may also submit comments, respond to each other's comments during the presentation. This session will also be archived and available for viewing at a later time at your convenience. If you are having technology trouble, you can email me. I am monitoring my email. My email is parsonsc@glastonburyus.org if you need me for the next hour. Matt, welcome, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm excited to share my story around creative thinking, project-based learning, and the design process within my own classroom environment. So to get started, I'll provide a little bit of a background to me and my relationship and experience in education. Right now I'm at the University of Connecticut, Associate Director of the Digital Media and Design Department at UConn Stanford. Previously, I was at the Center for 21st Century Skills at Education Connection, which I think is now referred to as EdAdvance. There I worked on a number of statewide initiatives in and around digital media. One of them was the Connecticut Student Film Festival and the film challenges associated with that. And then, of course, we also went on to establish the Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences. And then I transitioned over to the University of Connecticut Digital Media and Design program, which I think started in 2013. So this is really a story about me and my journey as an educator in regard to working with students in project-based learning environments, identifying some of the problems that I cared about, and then exploring these problems further. And ultimately, these problems relate very much to the topic today, which is around integrating the design thinking principles within the art or technology classroom environment, where we're looking to design and develop digital media and digital art products. So first of all, let me begin with my my kind of ill-defined problem. We'll be talking a little bit about ill-defined problems later on. But for those of you that are familiar with the work of the Center for 21st Century Skills, a lot of the challenges are implemented within what's referred to as a project-based learning environment. And I think we're all very familiar with project-based learning now, particularly with the emphasis of 21st century skills. As we know, PBL is a good instructional model for cultivating and challenging those important skills that we've deemed necessary for all our students to master as they go out into the real world. Within the project-based learning environment that we ran at the Center for 21st Century Skills, it started with a theme, which is very common within most PBL classroom environments. And then students within that theme are challenged with an ill-defined problem, and they have to go through a process of trying to define that problem. And then once they define that problem, then obviously they look to design a solution. And if we look at this is a pretty standard structure or journey, keeping with the theme for us today's journey, that most people go on when they're working in the design and development of some type of project. And even within PBL, that term itself is broadened to include problem-based learning, and I think Apple has challenge-based learning, we have design-based learning, but they're all very similar, engaging students in a process of problem solving in response to a real-world problem. And I'm going to share with you a story that I experienced in my first year working at the Center for 21st Century Skills, a problem that I think today I'm still trying to solve in many ways. And I think it kind of defined me and my my role as an educator. So one of the first years at the Center for 21st Century Skills, I was brought in to work on a digital media and design program. I'm actually saying that fully aware that Cindy Parsons was one of the first teachers to pilot the program, so she can probably remember some of the challenges within that first year. And the theme for this year was, oh, forgive me, let me back up very quickly. The solutions that I was involved with were creating a digital media product. And I do want to talk a little bit about digital media products, because the great thing about digital technology is that it creates an environment, or it provides us with tools and resources that allow us to create and make products that can be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom. And so this could be a movie, it could be a video, an animation, a website, it could be a series of cinemagraphs, which are kind of in between a video and a still image that's shared as part of a social media campaign. It could be a mobile app. It could be a variety of different types of digital media products. And the value of that is these tools make it very easy or easier to create and make products that can be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom environment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by that within my story. So I digressed a little bit, but going back to my time working at the Center for 21st Century Skills in my first year, we were challenged to create a PSA, a public service announcement. That was the first video challenge that students had. And they would have to produce that PSA, public service announcement, within the same type of project-based learning environment that I had outlined earlier. And the theme for that year was green. That was the theme, green. And, you know, a public service announcement is, in some ways, a really great project to start off with, particularly in regard to cultivating creativity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what creativity means, you know, in a moment. But, you know, the goal of creating a public service announcement is really about identifying information and sharing that information to an audience. And of course, we want that audience to value the information that they're receiving. So when we think about creating a product that can be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom, that goes beyond the allocation of a grade, the PSA is a great project because it allows the students to perhaps take a deeper dive into a problem that they really care about, and then share information with a target audience about that problem in order to serve and better that problem. And so in my first year working at the Center for 21st Century Skills, we were working on this public service announcement. The theme was green, and we convened 10 of our pilot schools were convened at Central Connecticut State University. And we were going to show our first drafts of our public service announcements. I'd only been at the Center for 21st Century Skills for about 2 to 3 months, and I remember feeling extremely nervous at the prospect of showing these first videos within the digital media and design program, partly because my boss was there and our funders were there, and there was a sense of excitement and positive anticipation towards the digital media movie making program that we were working on. And I remember gathering all of these files. I think there were 10 that were there that day, and I received, I think, 9 video files. And I remember I put them all in the sequence to play, and I pushed play, and I sat down next to my supervisor. And I remember having kind of mixed feelings about the first video that we saw, the first PSA we saw, because from a technical literacy perspective, it was great. You know, I thought that the camera shots are really good. They the sound wasn't too bad, which can be a challenge for anyone who's worked with video knows how difficult it can be working with sound. The transitions were reasonably good. The sequence of the story, how it transitioned from one shot to the other shot, was also reasonably good. But the problem that they identified within the theme green, I was kind of like less thrilled about, because they had selected recycling. Now, I'm not in any way undermining recycling. Recycling, as we know, is an important topic. But when you think about green theme, recycling is probably the first idea that's gonna come up in a brainstorming session or any other type of ideation session, because it's something that we've been working on as a society for many, many years. Is the idea that when we want to do good things for the environment, the first thing that comes to mind is recycle. And even as young children, we're told the importance of recycling. So a public service announcement that is communicating information about recycling, particularly when it's not really offering any new information about recycling, such as, hey, there's these bottles and we need to put the bottles in the blue trash can that's in the door, which I believe was the premise of this story. That theme, it wasn't really kind of like diving deep into the content. It wasn't really identifying a problem or sharing information that had real value. And so from a technical literacy piece was good, but from the theme that it selected, not so good. And, I remember my boss was kind of looking at me, and we were kind of like, okay, not bad. Well, bad luck may have it, the second video that we played, I remember thinking the second video I kind of had a little, probably a little more negative feeling about it, partly because the technical literacy side of things was not as strong as the first piece, which was okay. It was the first time we were doing this program, but the theme that they had selected again was recycling. And I remember thinking to myself that, wow, that's really bad luck that we've had two projects back to back, both on the theme of recycling, and they've kind of tackled it along a similar route. And I remember looking over at group 1 students and groups 2 students, and they were looking at each other, and they were kind of like pulling those faces as if like, oh man, I can't believe you guys chose the same idea as we did. Well, you should have seen their faces when we played the third video, because of course the third video was recycling. Out of the 7 videos that we played that day, out of the 9 videos that we played that day, 7 of them I think were on recycling, and it was kind of a real big eye opener for us at the Center for 21st Century Skills. And again, I want to emphasize we're not thinking anything negative around recycling, but in terms of identifying problems that we're really challenging students to think critically, particularly in regard to the angle that they were taking about recycling. We realized we needed to do some more work. So knowing that we still had to challenge the students to produce a documentary, and there was a couple of other video projects, we figured that we should stage an intervention. And I remember, the first thing I do as an educator is I would go and say, right, what did I do wrong? What could have I done better? And I remember I was kind of thinking, hey, did I mention recycling? Did I say accidentally or indirectly, oh, let's do recycling as the green theme? And I went through and looked at all of the material that I'd shared with the teachers, and I couldn't really find anything around recycling. There was a couple of resources that I'd shared, but there was nothing that kind of really directed them down the road of recycling. So when I was driving to the schools as part of this intervention to try and find out what we could do better to support students and teachers digging a little bit deeper into the challenges, I remember kind of like still questioning whether or not it was my fault or exactly where was the problem. And I remember when I connected with, I think it was the second or third school, I suddenly thought, wow, it's actually not my problem, not my fault per se, but neither was it the fault of the student or the educator, because I started to get see a general theme of feedback, which was the green theme. And the response I was getting was that the green theme was not broad enough. It didn't give the students and educators enough choice and selection. And I remember thinking not broad enough. I kept hearing the word not broad enough. And I remember thinking like, wow, not broad enough, green. And so I went away and I didn't really understand exactly what the problem was at the time, but I knew that I wanted to work out how we might be better at you know, cultivating what I was referring to as getting people to think of more original ideas, to go beyond the obvious ideas. And that kind of took me on a journey where I went in and pursued a second graduate program, took some classes at the International Center for Studies in Creativity, and realized really what I was talking about was how we can cultivate creative thinking skills within project-based learning environments. And that's kind of really set me up on the journey that I continue to pursue today within my own practice and with my ongoing studies. So talking about the word creativity, just very briefly going over what we mean by creativity. Well, specifically to what I was just talking about being original, you know, creativity is quite often associated with the word new, being original. And, you know, if you've got 100 projects, the one project that no one else in that room has thought about would be statistically rare. That's what we're kind of thinking about in regard to being new. But that's not the only piece around creativity. The other piece, the other word that gets thrown around a lot is useful. So when we're talking about creativity, we're thinking about something new, but also something that's useful, something that has value to an audience, to an individual. And going back again to digital media and digital media products, we have this opportunity to create what hopefully is a new digital media product or a new work of art that we can try and have a goal of it having value beyond the four walls of the classroom. So it is useful. And certainly the word useful, you know, we kind of get the word new, but the word useful does generate some questions. So, you know, who has to consider it useful? Who has to value this new product, this new outcome, in order for it to be considered creative? And so for those of you that are familiar with some of the research within the field of creativity, you run into what's often referred to as little c creativity, which is basically the idea that the new outcome that has come about has value, is useful to the individual, as opposed to maybe a larger audience. And I think that's a good way that we can separate a work of art that's created in an elementary school classroom, you know, the work of art that maybe my eldest, my 5-year-old or my 3-year-old create, and then compare it to someone like the work of Picasso, for example. You know, both could be considered creative. My boy or children in an elementary school, they are producing works of art, learning new techniques that have value to them, that are useful to them, and so that would fall under little c creativity. But as we began to expand the value, the usefulness, so it expands beyond that individual, maybe to a smaller group, a larger group, a bigger group, we start getting into society and we can start talking about innovative products such as the Apple iPhone, for example. Then we're getting into big C creativity. And there's a lot of research in this field around big C, little c creativity. And in fact, this has recently been expanded further into the 4C creativity, where we kind of have kind of 4 stages of creative outcomes. And if you're interested in that work, you can find that work. Ron Beghetto and James Kaufman at the University of Connecticut have been working on the 4 Ps of creativity, and I believe it's actually an open source article that they put online, so you can Google that if you're interested in exploring more of that. But for our purpose today with this webinar, what I want us to do as we look at using digital technology to produce new products within our classroom environment is to think about how we can identify problems and use the digital products to help solve those problems or influence some of those problems and allow those products to be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom, and look at how they might have value beyond the four walls of the classroom. So within my studies of creativity, I do want us to think a little bit about, when we think about creativity as being something new and useful, it's certainly something that actually does expand beyond the arts. And I just want to show a quote from J. Paul Guilford, 1958. He's often credited with being one of the founders of the study of creativity during his inaugural speech to the American Psychological Association in 1958. And as part of that speech, he said, "I think of creativity as being something that lies behind behavior that is imaginative and inventive. Such behavior can be found in clearest form in the lives of certain people, scientists who make new discoveries and construct new theories, artists, designers, writers and composers, and architects, designers and builders." So we're keeping with that theme of new, and we can see, particularly the one that strikes me is scientists who make new discoveries and construct new theories. So generating knowledge that has value is a creative act. And again, it's something that certainly expands beyond the four walls of the classroom, beyond the art classroom. But Joy Paul Guilford also said that, in the art classroom, it's an environment within the traditional school environment where students are expected to be inventive. They're expected to be creative. If you think about what art educators do, is that they provide techniques and provide knowledge and information, rather, so students can go about and use this knowledge to generate new products within that learning environment that can have value. And keep thinking about that word value, value to them, value to other students in the class, and perhaps value beyond the four walls of the classroom. And this was some of the knowledge that I was accessing as part of my journey to try and solve that problem that I shared at the very beginning. And I started to think to myself, all right, so we've got a lot of knowledge about creativity and what is creativity. So how do we begin to integrate this within the learning environment, within the process of designing, using digital media to design a product or service in response to a real-world problem? And so this continued my journey, but then also keeps with the general theme of journey, because creativity is certainly one field, but another field is the process of problem solving, how we go about designing these solutions and solving problems. And that brings in a new discussion, which is around creative solving methodology, which is, how I see it, a kind of deliberate act that we've been exposed to a problem, like the models that I shared at the very beginning, and then we engage our students in a journey to solve that problem. And actually, some of the research behind that goes a lot earlier than Joy Guilford in 1958. Graham Wallace, who wrote a book called The Art of Thought, he was really interested in this concept of well, what's the journey that leads to these creative outcomes, where we get these new and useful outcomes for an individual, for our society. And he went about studying and observing people who had a track record of producing creative outcomes that were considered new and useful. And he began to see a journey unfold for them, where there was a number of distinct stages. And you can see here, he says the first stage is preparation, the stage during which the problem was investigated in all directions. So we kind of get this problem, and an individual goes on a process of investigating that problem in all directions, so taking a deeper dive, which we can see if we go back to that example around recycling, that probably we can assume that maybe knowing that the information they were sharing was probably information that they already had, which is, we need to take a bottle and put it into the blue trash trash can, for example, they didn't, you know, there wasn't really a process to go and find out, well, why is it that people don't put the bottle in the trash can? Everyone knows they should, but they're not doing it. So really the problem is, how do you make people do it, and what's the reasons that's stopping them doing it? So that involves an individual to investigate in all the directions. The second stage, during which he was not consciously thinking about the problem, which I shall call incubation. So this is a piece that I want you to think about, because I come back towards this toward the end of the webinar. But this idea of not consciously thinking about the problem and incubation, it's this time where we kind of you know, allow the students to just take a break from having the pressure of coming up with an idea for their project, and just let them explore and play with lots of different ideas. And I've spent a couple of years trying to look at how I might provide that type of environment within the project-based learning environments that I implement within my own classroom. And the final one in this piece was illumination, which is kind of when the idea makes itself known. So they get a sense of the ideal outcome. And then, of course, they begin their journey to go and design and develop that idea further. So really keeping with this theme of a journey, creative problem solving is a journey. And one of the things that I challenge you as educators as these new art standards come about is for you to think about, right, how might I redesign some of my classroom environments in a way that engages students on this journey of problem solving as we go about designing solutions or designing works of art, or whatever the outcome that you're challenging the students to achieve, to reach, to focus not just on the destination, but also that journey that they embark on in order to get to that destination. And one of the first starting points is being presented with an ill-defined problem. So if you went, again, going back to my model at the very beginning that I shared with you, you have a theme, and then an ill-defined problem is presented to the students. And that's the same type of ill-defined problem that is presented in the professional environment within the fields of art and design. Is you're given an ill-defined problem, and the first thing you have to do is you have to try and define that problem before you go and embark on a journey to solving that problem. And Horst Rittel in 1967, he explored this concept a little bit of an ill-defined problem, which you know, in the past was referred to a lot as a wicked problem, and I think that term is coming back a little bit more now, wicked problem, and it refers to that class of social system problems which are ill-formulated, where the information is confusing, where there are many clients and decision makers within conflicting values, and where the ramification into the whole system are thoroughly confusing. And I think in some ways, you know, we begin to see a slight difference between what takes place in the classroom environment and what perhaps takes place in the real world. I'm sure we can all relate to, in the classroom environment, students aren't often exposed to ill-defined problems where information is confusing, where there's lots of decision makers and there's conflicting values and there's different types of ramifications. It's just generally confusing. One of our roles as educators is to not make it confusing, to make sure the students understand what they have to do and what they need to do in order to achieve an outcome. And so in some ways, we quite often present to our students defined problems, not ill-defined problems. And I can say that working at the Center for 21st Century Skills and also working at the University of Connecticut, one of the things that I've worked on, particularly working with freshman students, is getting them comfortable with dealing with the type of ambiguity that exists in a real-world problem, because it is very confusing. And quite often I share ill-defined problems with my students, and they come up to me and they say, hey, what do you want me to do? And I look them in the eye and I say, I really don't know. I don't know what you're going to do, because I don't know what path what course you've plotted yet. There's lots of different directions you can head in, and only when you've kind of decided your direction and begin heading it down that direction will I get a better sense of where you're heading. And students do find that some of them, become anxious in those types of environments and find it very uncomfortable to navigate. And, I've certainly realized that part of my role as an educator is supporting and guiding students working with what is ambiguity, so developing a tolerance for ambiguity, which is quite often associated with creativity. There's some of us that can tolerate ambiguity, and there are others that can't. But I know within our field, in digital media and design, it's essential that students are able to tolerate ambiguity. And so exposing them to these types of wicked problems within project-based learning environments, within the design process, is very, very important, as it is also providing them with the skills they need in order to try and define those problems. So really, as I said, the goal for students and any designer is to try and define that problem so you can then go about producing an idea that you can pursue and further design and develop. And that's really a journey, a creative problem-solving journey. And since the field of creativity emerged, we've seen a number of strategies and methodologies that have come about within industry to try and engage students and professionals in this journey of creative problem-solving, which ultimately begins when an ill-defined problem is presented to itself. So this was the Universal Traveler, which came out, I think, in 1973. And you really, once again, see the sense of a journey here, different stages of the process. And you can see at the start point, we have this idea of accepting the situation, which is similar to Graham Wallace's preparation. You're going to see a lot of common themes that emerge with these different design methodologies. This idea that you have this ill-defined problem, and you have to go about and you have to accept this ill-defined problem. You have to make a commitment to solving it. And you have to get a better understanding, gather information, and conduct research in order to begin solving that ill-defined problem. And so the next stage in this Universal Traveler is analyze, and then you define. And only when you've defined the problem do you begin to engage in an ideation session. And I know sometimes when I've been in I'd say classrooms of all different ages, quite often the early stages of a project, you can sometimes begin with a short series of brainstorming sessions. And it's not really the most conducive environment for cultivating a new and useful idea. And so, I think that we as educators, we can all probably do better, and without a doubt, time constraints are a big issue. But finding ways to try and have an ill-defined problem and give the students a time they need to go and define that problem a little bit more. And that's really my main focus for the rest of this presentation, is focusing a lot on those early stages of the process. Here's another one. This is creative problem-solving methodology, this idea that we go on a journey in response to an ill-defined problem. This one is from Foresight, and you can see it's a simple 4 stages. First, you clarify the situation. Then you generate the ideas, you develop the solution, you implement the plans. So once again, you can see that there's this idea that the first thing that you need to do on this journey to solving a problem is to clarify the situation. And we can talk a little bit about what we mean in regard to clarifying the situation if there's questions that arise. But there's certainly a tremendous amount of information online. And part of our role as an educator is to think about how we might take evidence-based strategies and apply them in the classroom environment, which sometimes might mean a 40-minute classroom period. But we want our students to definitely gather information about the problem, to identify how that problem, who is impacted, who's affected by that problem, and what's the most ideal outcome, what's been tried before about that problem. And all of this involves research. Some of that research can take place online, but quite often it also requires students to generate their own data and their own research. So I think there's lots of fun opportunities that exist in just clarifying the situation. before we get into generating ideas. And I certainly find from my experience that the more students understand the problem, the deeper the dive they've taken into the problem, gathering the information, getting to know the audience, getting to know those who are affected, getting a better understanding of the stakeholders and you know, their perceived ideal outcomes, the more likely they are to generate ideas that are not only new, but also useful and that have value beyond the four walls of the classroom environment. And you also can get buy-in from them as well. So moving on to another creative problem-solving methodology, which I think we're all very familiar with now, is design thinking. And I'm going to just take probably a few minutes on this one. So this is very popular. Again, we're seeing the same type of journey, you know, in response to an ill-defined problem. But there are a couple of things to point out here that I think are particularly useful in regard to using digital technology and designing a product that can be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom. We have this idea of empathy being brought in here. And really what that's about is it's about human-centered design. The idea that you're thinking about designing a solution to a real-world problem, go and get to know who's impacted by the problem and get a better sense of who they are and what they need. And again, fun opportunities for research and field work and generating your own data. You can't always do that just through a simple Google search. And we could talk, you know, a long time just about clarification. But as I said, there's lots and lots of materials online around this. And even if you go and visit the D-School website, which is really design thinking comes out of IDEO, but also something that was designed and developed within the D-School. You know, they've got lots of different activities that can help, you know, make students understand the importance of empathy with their audience and always making sure that the user who's going to benefit from this product is at the forefront of the design process. You're always thinking about them. And I know in my experience, when I've tried to run some of these activities, it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for everyone. I certainly have identified it as being a challenge for students who quite often feel like, okay, I'm targeting millennials. Well, I'm a millennial and I know everything there is to know about millennials. Well, no, that's not actually the case, because millennials is quite broad. You might be targeting a particular group of millennials, a particular age group within millennials, because of course high school students will have a completely different needs and problems, or problems will impact high school students in a different way than they impact college students. And you've really got to put yourselves into the shoes of that user in order to really understand them and understand how the problem is impacting them. And then you work on this, you know, defining the problem a little bit more, which is really identifying an ideal outcome. And then you go into ideation, which is, you know, brainstorming is one ideation strategy, but there are lots of different ideation strategies. And again, there's lots of resources online for ideation strategies. And we as educators should go and gather some of this information and try and work how we might bring in some of these ideation sessions and make them work in a 40-minute class period. And then the other piece that I think is really crucial for us as artists and designers within the classroom environment is prototyping. And prototyping is something that can begin even as a paper prototype, all the way up to using something like a 3D printer, depending on, or a first draft, or a first render, a test render of a digital media product, a draft of an edit. Prototyping is an iteration process, is an essential skill, again, for students to explore within this CPS methodology. And I would try and do everything you can as a teacher to try and make sure the students have an opportunity to prototype and share something, ideally with the users that they're intending to benefit, hoping to benefit with their solution, from their solution. Getting the prototypes in their hands and getting feedback, because then what you're doing is you're gathering more data. We see this in industry all of the time. Big internet companies go about on the streets of New York City with their prototypes for an update in their mobile app, and they just go and, you know, give people $10 Starbucks cards and say, hey, do you mind taking 5 minutes to go and look at our new mobile app? And they will sit back and observe how these users are interacting with their mobile app. How do left-handed people interact with the app versus right-handed people? How do people that are familiar with the brand interact with the app versus people that aren't familiar with the brand? How do people who have visited the app before differ from those who haven't interacted it before? If we put pictures up, how does over words, what type of things are we seeing? So that's prototyping. And I'm sure we're all familiar with prototyping, but it's certainly an important part of the process. So that's really the design methodology that's out there, and you know, to kind of begin summing up my presentation and going back to my own personal journey, I genuinely believe that we as educators need to gather information, but only we truly understand what works best in our own classroom environment. I think in some ways it's similar to my experience as a parent. You know, when you're about to have a child, you receive lots and lots of advice on what to do and what not to do. But at the end of the day, there are these general things, you know, do you wake a sleeping baby up? Do you not wake a sleeping baby up? When do you feed the baby? When do you not? Do you let them cry? Do you not let them cry? But at the end of the day, only the parent who actually has the child in front of them can make the best decisions for that child. And I really believe that we as educators need to make sure we take charge of our own learning environments. And so the information I'm sharing with you today is hopefully just getting you to think about, wow, you know, we have this design thinking methodology, this creative problem solving methodology, the idea that we engage our students on a journey as they go about designing digital media products that could be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom. And maybe we set the goal that the products and services that they generate have value to an audience, and we can determine, you know, you can work as educators how you evaluate that value. But my journey as an educator, it really led me to this model. And this is my model, and this works for me in my classroom environment. And that's where I've taken the different pieces of information that I've gathered on my journey. You'll see on the left of your screen the Torrance incubation model of teaching and learning. That was E. Paul Torrance is a creativity scholar. He's often referred to as the father of creativity. He did a number of significant studies. One of them was a longitudinal study where he identified a creativity skill set and then developed ways to teach for those skills, and then proved through his studies that you can cultivate and teach these specific creative thinking skills. And ironically, one of them is the ability to break with habit-bound thinking, which would have helped with that example I gave with the PSAs at the beginning. And another one is fluency, the ability to produce and consider many alternatives. And you can see in the model, where in the red part, it says produce and consider many alternatives, be original, because that's me taking what I value within my learning environment, and that's the ability to think creatively. And you know, we see deepening expectations, be aware of emotions, be flexible. This model is very much works for me in one of my freshman classes. It's a 6-week period. But I would like to say, as these new standards are coming on board, for teachers, you know, art teachers around the state, to think about the type of models that they can create. And it could be that you already have some of your own models. Maybe it's just a case of getting them down on paper and trying to refine them a little bit, so you begin to integrate some of the standards into these models and develop strategies on how you can cultivate the skills that the standards is encouraging you to cultivate. I did say I'd come back to incubation. You know, one of the big changes I did with this model a few years ago is I wanted to try and find ways to give those students an opportunity to incubate ideas. What I did was, on the first day of the semester, I share the final project, even though we don't begin it in week 10. You know, week 1 to week 10, you know, we're learning the software and we're learning the technology, and we're kind of walking them through the process. But I still, on week 1, share the project idea. And then I integrate kind of 10-minute sessions here and there before or at the end of my classes. And they vary from kind of brain walking, which is a variation of brainstorming that can be completed comfortably in a 40-minute period. I get them to go away and do mind mapping, another type of ideation strategy, and I get them to submit their mind maps. So they're doing that out of class. It's more of an individual strategy. I get them to take their ideas out on dates, to try and encourage them to date multiple ideas, because the first thing that you tend to get after week 1 is students coming up to you and saying, hey, I've already got my idea. And that's where I say to them, okay, you have one idea. I'm hoping you're going to have 50. And don't panic. I'm not saying you can't do your idea. Just go and car park it, write it down, put it in a corner, and have faith it's not going anywhere. But I'm looking for you to generate more ideas. And so these date ideas, kind of like speed dating, I get them all in a row and get them to take different ideas out on a date once in a while. So I've integrated some of my own strategies. And then eventually we go about towards the end of the model, and every student in my class, if I have 18 students, I'm looking for 18 presentations, 18 different idea pitches, and then we form our project teams, and then from 18 students we go down to about 4 or 5 groups, and then the students provide a weekly progress report. And quite often I get questions about what do I do with evaluation. Well, of course, I'm in higher ed, so it's a slightly different situation, but we still need to evaluate the progress that is taking place within our classroom. And what I did, what was a big help for me with this model, is I shifted myself away from the destination, away from the final product, and put more emphasis on integrating evaluation within the process. And that's what I, as an educator, value and care about. It's where I can put more of my time into cultivating the skills that I think are more important and have less pressure to always deliver those final products. And so students deliver these weekly progress reports that I can build into my evaluation system. And for those of you that are interested in the project idea, you know, for this project, I still get students to work with video and film. And this is it, work in a group. You are challenged to produce an online video in response to a real-world problem. The problem can be anything you want, but it must be genuine and benefit from the production of an online video. So you can see that I've done away with the theme, and I really just say, create any video you want. And that is an ill-defined problem, and that is a problem that will get students coming up to you and saying, wait, how long do you want my video to be? And that's where I say, I don't know. And I think the more you can say I don't know to at the very, very beginning, the more likely it is that you've identified an ill-defined problem for your students to experience. I, as an educator, tend to make notes of the ideas that are generated. I'm always trying to challenge myself to make sure that my classroom environment is conducive for the producing lots of original and varied ideas, going back from the beginning of my journey that I shared with you at the very beginning. And I actually put 3 stars. You know, I started, so is this the first time I've ever had this idea in the classroom? 3 stars is kind of like, you know, it's an idea that I haven't even thought about before. And one of the things that I noticed early on was when I began to introduce this incubation period, which in essence gave the students 10 weeks to kind of like explore lots of ideas by themselves, I was amazed about how these problems became very personable to them. It was things that they cared about. So, you know, backing up data was because a student had lost data one time, conducted lots of research on how to back up data, and they now valued the different ideas that they had generated on how to back up idea. So they had gone through and identified a new solution to them that they had value, and they were looking to make sure that they could share that information, new information, with a new audience that of course would have value to them. Know your rights when you're pulled over. color blindness. You know, these are really creative ideas that go far beyond the type of ideas that I had before I introduced just that incubation period. If you're interested in this particular project, these were the 4 ideas that were selected to go into the group stage. Unfortunately, my favorite ideas are never usually the ones that get selected, but that's something that really it's up to the students to choose. So this is a fun activity for you to try with your students one time. This is an activity we are challenging them to produce and consider many alternatives. It's a good warm-up before an ideation session takes place. Wicked problem. Imagine if you could suddenly fly. List as many problems as you can that would exist if this situation was suddenly to occur. And you can kind of have fun with something like that. I realized on my slide I did want to finish with a quote. Let me just go fast forward to see if I've got the quote. Yes, I do. I have the quote here. Just before I turn it over to Cindy with any questions, here's a quote from Professor Joseph Brenzulli from the University of Connecticut. It's actually in the first film I produced, Creativity in Education. He said, "If I predetermined the outcome, then the opportunities for creativity do not exist." And not only am I challenging you as educators to take these art standards and look at applying them in the classroom and perhaps creating some of your own models that can engage students in this design process, this journey of designing a solution to a real world problem. But it's also about letting them have the freedom to control that outcome and produce new and useful products that can be shared beyond the 4 walls of the classroom. So I'll stop there, opening up for discussion.
Matt, thanks a lot. We're going to see if anybody has questions. Allison, if you're there, you can unmute them, the attendees.
Okay, will do.
So if anybody has any questions for Matt at this time, now's the time to ask.
And everybody is currently unmuted, so ask away.
Everybody, thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Matt. I have one actually. You talked about evaluating during the process.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how you evaluate the process?
Sure. So, you know, for me, I split my class up into kind of 2 sections. So if I just talk about one class, Digital Foundations, it really is about getting students to create a digital media product at the end of a 16-week semester. And one of the things that we want to do as freshmen is we want them to get a better understanding of the skills that are needed in order to succeed on that journey of designing that solution. And, you know, one of the reasons why project-based learning and even the art standards is gained in prominence, yes, we've got digital technology, but also we're in a situation where a lot of the solutions, a lot of the problems that we have require people to be able to collaborate, communicate, think creatively, problem solve, deal with ambiguity. And so project-based learning is great for that. And so we have this in this first semester, we want to engage our students in an experience where they get to experience an environment where they can kind of use those skills. But it's kind of split into two sections. So the first section, let's just say from week 1 to week 10, it's a little bit more of a traditional kind of lecture-based environment per se. We'll do 2 to 3 week individual mini projects. And in terms of the evaluation for that, it's pretty similar to what exists in other classrooms, in that, or more traditional classrooms, in that, you know, I share with them the assignment. I usually let them self-select between 3 groups, beginner, intermediate, or advanced. They self-select what assignment they want to choose. And I grade them on the product that they submit. And I have a rubric for that product. But to your question, Cindy, from week 10 to week 16, it's pretty much, they're all engaged in this final project. And one of the big things that I did is focus more on the process than the product. Right. Because they're not turning in a product every single week. But what it allows me to do is I actually would set it up, so I'd say we've got 4 groups or 5 groups. I mean, my class size varies. But let's just say we average, I think I'm averaging about 5 to 6 groups a class. I would have 3 of them have progress reports, for example, due on the Tuesday. So every Tuesday, the class is split up into 15-minute sections, and they have to deliver a progress report of what they've accomplished from the previous week. And 3 groups present their progress reports, and what I'm doing is I'm evaluating them at that stage. So they're bringing projects to me, but all of them have embarked on a different journey. So I sit there, and this is my role as the subject matter expert in the classroom, is that I need to say, right, your film, you need to have a storyboard, and maybe I share with them a little bit of information about that storyboard. And that now becomes a deliverable, which is due the following week.
Okay.
And I say, you know, I might say to another group, all right, guys, I need you to generate 10 questions. I need you to create an outline of your video, splitting into beginning, middle, and end. And I want you to identify what information you need to share in the beginning, middle, and end. I mean, quite often, sometimes I just need to say, next week, I need another group. Sometimes I'd say, look, I don't think you've defined your problem enough. I think it's still all over the place. I need to know who your target audience is, and I need to get a better sense of what you want them to feel and what the takeaway is, the call to action after watching your video. And so I give each of these 3 different groups, they've got 3 different deliverables. I make a note of them, and they're due the following week. So those 3 groups have an entire week to work. They can work in one of the class periods while I do progress reports with the other group, or they don't have to come in, they can work in their groups, because remember, I'm trying to get them to collaborate and communicate. So they're working, you know, outside the classroom environment. And so literally every week they have different deliverables, and I challenge them on it. So I expect to see those deliverables, and if the deliverable isn't there, then they need to provide an explanation as to why it isn't there. And sometimes I actually get a lot more from them explaining why they didn't deliver than actually seeing the product, because they're sharing the challenges that they experienced while they were trying to develop the deliverable. I'm able to tick a lot of the boxes in regard to what I want them to experience. So that's how I go about it. And even the final evaluation isn't the video, because some groups just bite off more than they can chew and they don't deliver a video. So even my final deliverable, or the final experience as the exam period, is a final exam of them presenting what they've learned during the process.
That's really good. That's great formative assessment. Anybody else have any questions for Matt?
I had a question, Matt, about in your incubation step, the slide that's showing. I was just curious what the word point stood for. You have a bullet there that says same point.
Yeah, I could probably, you know, be. I could talk a lot about this model. You know, so that strategy point, you can actually, again, it's online. It stands for pluses, opportunities, issues, and new thinking. So what I sometimes do is I'll usually, when we've kind of, you know, say we've got 18 students pitch an idea, I have a process where we have like a stage just before we select our 4 or 5 groups, where there's like 10 ideas that are being discussed as possible ideas that we're moving forward with into the next stage of the process. And what I do is I conduct point with them, and I go through each project, each idea pitch, and we go through, right, what's the pluses? What are the opportunities for you as a student? What are the issues that exist in this idea, right? You know, like, are you biting off more than you can chew? Is this realistic? Is one of the issues the fact that the project isn't actually defined enough yet? And then what new thinking is coming up as we're talking about this project? So it's a great convergent thinking strategy. Pluses, opportunities, issues, and new thinking.
Thank you.
It's very similar to a SWOT analysis, by the way, if there's any business folks on the call.
Anybody else have anything to say, or comment, or questions?
Can you hear me? I have a question for Matt.
Okay.
Hi. Thanks, Matt. I just wondered if you could share like an actual, I know the process is really important, but a product that one of the groups made, and I apologize if you said that in the beginning. I kind of got signed in late, so.
It's a good question. I think I've got all of my examples online. I can share a couple of links to Cindy afterwards, but I think for me to put one now. But you know, what I would say about that question is I'm obviously probably going to show you the successful videos, right? You know, as I said, not all videos are created. You know, the ideas that are selected, students will be students, and sometimes they just choose a project that's too ambitious within the time frame that they have, or they don't have the skills they need in order to pull this project off. And so I do, I mean, again, this is to go off on a tangent now, but I build failure opportunities into my classroom experiences as well. So I don't have an issue with a student or a group of students pursuing a journey down a road where I suspect that they're going to fail. And so long as I'm seeing learning taking place, I'm okay with that. So the examples that I show you are probably going to be the students that selected an idea that worked really well and just set them up, and you know, just all the things came together and worked. I can certainly show some of those ideas.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else before finish up? Matt, that's great. You can send those links to me, and I'll send them out to people that have participated today.
Great.
Thank you for your great presentation. It was really inspiring to see how design is getting done at your level. But you know, I can see ways to bring that down to secondary level or even middle school level. And we're actually trying to teach design here in Glastonbury at the elementary level. So just some good ideas to bring in to our classroom.
You know what? Just to finish up on, you know, because you mentioned the middle school. One thing that I will say is that there's different classrooms. You have to ask yourself, what's the goal? You know, we do have classes where it's about, we want them to learn the basic 12 principles of animation, and we want to teach them After Effects. And we still give them opportunities to experience ill-defined problems, but the focus is a lot more on the technology and making sure that they're learning the technology. So we look at the products and determine if they're learning the technology. And then there are other classes where we want them to experience the design process. And so this was definitely a focus on that design process. I don't want to give the suggestion that there isn't a place or a class where students sit down and learn how to edit a video. They learn that technology component piece. So I think schools and educators need to think about, right, can I do both in one class? But if I have a video 1 and a video 2 class, for example, I think that in itself might be a case of, right, video 1's going to be, you know, teaching them the hard skills, the low-hanging fruit, learning to do the technology. And video 2 is going to be where they actually learn to engage the process of making a video, because the process is harder than the product.
Right, right.
Or the button pushing.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, we have to teach it all. It doesn't matter what level we're teaching. We just have to teach it to meet their ability to learn at whatever age they are. All right. Well, I thank you again, and we're going to sign off now. And this webinar will be available in archive once it's sent to me from the State Department of Ed, and I'll get it out to everybody. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That, you can stand for a minute to make sure we have the recording. And Allison, you still there?
I am still with you.
Right. I think we're all set.
Excellent. Yeah, recording went well. Everything showed up. Perfect. Couldn't ask for better.
Matt did a great job.
Thank you, Matt, so much.
I appreciate that. That was weird. I mean, you're talking to a computer screen.
I know.
Yeah, I was like, I was thinking how much of my like jokes and charm rely on being physically present in the room.
That's true.
Yeah, and I was going through my story and I was like, oh my God, this might be really a boring story I'm telling right now without the performance aspect.
It was excellent.
But,
All right, well.
Thanks again, and I'm going to see you at the Summer Institute, right?
Wait, what's that?
That's the.
Oh, yes.
I heard you're
Yes,
presenting.
sorry.
Oh.
Yes, I am. Yes, in June. Sorry, my bad. Yes, I'll be there.
I'll be there too, so I'll see you there.
Great. And then these, really quickly, Cindy, these links that I'm sending you, where are they going? You're just showing them on the...
I'm going to just share them with the people that have asked for them. I'm not going to let them go public. It's, you know, I understand your concern about that too.
All right. Cool. I'll send them right now so I don't forget.
Okay, great.
And Cindy, and of course, with your permission, I might talk to Steve Armstrong. I'm a social studies person, as is the person I am standing in for currently. And we do a lot of this line of questioning process stuff, group-based work, documentary filmmaking, PSA type stuff in the social studies classrooms for like human rights units, stuff like this. So we might cross-link you, if that's okay, with some of the social studies webinars that go out.
Sure, that's fine.
If that would be, you know, acceptable.
Yeah, I think you guys could have a lot more, well, a lot of fun as well in regard to like that problem, like deeping into the problem, thinking about how it impacts the society. Absolutely. Good
And
idea.
the process of communicating that and what you need to go through in order to create a product that gets that message across, and how to, you know, sort of guide students throughout, you know, coming up with a process is super important in the social studies. So.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you guys again. And Cindy, if you need anything from me, getting those links out to anybody, anything like that, you know, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to help out.
Great. I appreciate
Excellent.
you guys. Great session. This is really food for thought, Matt. I mean, I know I've taught a lot of these design things for high school, but now I'm trying to figure out how to implement them to younger kids with my curriculum here. So this is great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
No worries. And you know, and I still remember your PSA was about driving to school. You wasn't one of the 7 who did the recycling.
That's right. Great kid.
I paused for a moment as I was telling the story, and I was like, wait, what was Cindy's? And I was like, phew.
Actually, we won an award that year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really good video, but it was also one of the only videos on recycling, so it was a really good video. Yeah. All right, great.
Thanks again. I'll talk to you guys.
All right.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks, Alison. Bye-bye.
Bye.